session, Black Canadian Experiences in Environmental Education, and I'm Clara Luke, your facilitator. So I'm going to start the session with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll do introductions. If you'd like, please identify which territory you're joining from in the chat. So I'm just going to share my screen for the land acknowledgement. Okay. We acknowledge the traditional territory. Oh, I've got this in the way here. Sorry about that. Which the conference is being hosted. For many thousands of years, the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas, Michisagig of the Credit, have sought to walk gently on this land. This territory is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. This acknowledgement signals our desire to seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based on honor and deep respect, and is a starting point to remind us all to enact this work in our personal and professional lives. Okay. So now I'm going to, once again, I'm Clara Luke, Project Supervisor at EcoSchools Canada, and it's my great pleasure to be the facilitator for this session today. I'd also like to introduce our Zoom host, Rosa Na, and Rosa will be behind the scenes making sure everything's running smoothly. So now I'll introduce our presenters for today. And presenters, if you could just wave or raise your hand when I introduce you, that would be great. So first we have Alison Williams. Alison is a teacher with the Toronto District School Board and is currently working via the virtual school platform. Always passionate about the environment, Alison has focused on making the outdoors accessible for her students and their families, regardless of where they live, their cultural background, or their prior experiences with the natural world. Alison is currently pursuing her Master's of Education part-time at OISE, focusing on curriculum and pedagogy. She has a deep interest in science and environmental education, as well as community development at the local and international level. Next, I'll introduce Rodway Daniels. Rodway is an outdoor education specialist in the Toronto District School Board who has been facilitating student inquiry for 22 years. As Rod shares what he's learned from the land with his students, he hopes to inspire them to deepen their connection to it. Once that seed is planted, he hopes that they, too, will learn to love and live with respect on the lands where they live. Rod loves the people he works with and is always looking to have a good time. He is fully himself outdoors, whether camping, biking, snowshoeing, backpacking, running trails, or just sitting. Rod is captivated by his wife and finds joy as the daddy of a daughter and 2 sons. And finally, we have Matthew Webbe, who is an educator of Afro-Latinx heritage, who has worked in various areas with the Toronto District School Board since 2000. He has had many roles as an educator, including classroom teacher, centrally assigned teacher, elementary vice principal, and principal. Matthew is currently a member of the Ontario Principals Council's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee for the Toronto region. He has taught various additional qualifications courses in different subjects and has been a part of AQ guidance development for the Ontario College of Teachers for different courses. Matthew is passionate about environmental racism in the context of urban planning and places. So with that, I'll just ask everyone who's joining today, if you have any questions or comments for our presenters, please add them to the chat and we'll get to them in the last 10 minutes of the session. Presenters, please take it away.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to just prepare my screen and get started. Okay. Are you able to see it? Yes. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to start off our conversation. And the first part is, how can we encourage greater diversity in environmental education? And that's one of the things that us three presenters would like to discuss. I'll give you a little bit of background information about me. My name is Alison. And as I said before, I teach with the Toronto District School Board. This year I'm doing virtual with kindergarten, but I've taught a variety of grades in primary, junior as well. I've taught internationally, and I've worked in China and in Ghana and in Colombia. And I really like to work with educators overseas and see how they teach science and environmental education. And it's really interesting to see how each country or each region of the world does it differently. From my own experience and my interaction with the outdoors, I was fortunate it began at an early age. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, but my parents immigrated to Canada from the Caribbean and from South America. So if you take a look at the pictures right here, you'll see that this is an aerial view of Scarborough, which is where I grew up and where I still live. My mother is from Dominica, and as you can see, it's a volcanic island, but it's lush and it's green. So outdoors and outdoor education is part of life. And my dad is from Guyana, which is also another place that is very green, very lush, and nature is a very important part of one's culture and society. Okay. In many countries, outdoor education, in air quotes, and outdoor activities are actually a part of everyday life. So for example, at school, many of the students will grow food for their own community. For family outings, for example, they'll go to the water. It's just a part of natural life. It's not necessarily considered outdoor ed. Here's an example of a picture from a school in the Philippines. It's in San Roque Elementary School. It's in the Philippines, and as you can see, one of the—
Alison,
yes.
Can you press play on your present again, honey?
Oh, it's not working?
It's okay. Yeah, we just haven't seen your slides yet. We can see your screen.
Let me just stop sharing. Sorry about that, everybody.
That's okay.
Thank you very much.
That's okay, hon.
Let's try this. Okay.
Everyone's just being really super polite because they're really interested in what you're saying.
Oh, they're so nice. Thank you.
I know, right?
Okay, I know what I need to do. Give me just a minute.
It's all good. It's all good. We're definitely imagining that lush and beautiful space because your description is so good, right? And we're imagining those kids in those spaces doing those things.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, hold on a second. Let me try it this way.
So Alison, we could fully see your screen. I think you just needed to press present on the presentation.
Got it. Okay, hold on. Let me stop for just a second, please. No. It's very strange. I have it all over here. Just 1 minute, please.
No problem at all.
Okay, there we go. Okay,
Awesome.
Can you see it now?
Yes, that is
so
perfect. And it looks excellent.
Okay.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's okay. So here is the first part that I mentioned. So that's a little bit about me. The second part were the pictures. So I wanted you to get an idea. So this is where I live in Scarborough, where I grew up. This is where my mother was from. And as you can see, it's very green and very lush. And this is Guyana, which is also green and lush, part of South America. So here is a picture that I really did want you to see. And this is a picture of a school in the Philippines where one of the roles of the student is to actually grow the garden. And here's another one in Ghana. This is in another part of Ghana from where I was working, but that's just one of the roles. So if you're a junior secondary school student, which is basically grade six-ish and up, you will be, one of your responsibilities is to grow. And even at the elementary level, you grow food for the community. Okay, so a connection of the outdoors, for me, for example, I was lucky. It was created with gardening, with outdoor activities. We did a lot of camping and walking outdoors. And then when I became a teacher, I really wanted to find a way to encourage my students to do the same thing. So I was involved in the eco team with a team of educators at my schools, and we really focused on becoming aware and having an appreciation for the natural world and the environment. At Play, one of the things that I liked to do was I was a hike leader and an ambassador for Rouge National Urban Park before it became the park. So now things are changing. And I also had a chance to work for EcoSchools, I was really fortunate for that. Now, when we are educators and we're looking about how we can help our students to become more aware of the outdoors, we need to look at it on 3 different levels. So the first one would be locally. For example, what can you see from your window or your balcony? So many of my students live in taller apartment buildings, such as these ones. So when I'm planning, especially for whether it's in school or whether it's virtual, I make sure that it's not going to make it inconvenient for my families. So I look and I say, what can you see outside your window, or if you have a balcony? Then when you're looking at the wider community, one of the things that I like to think of is, where are the green spaces near where my students live? So do they have to walk very far to get to a park? Is there a park or a local green space, or is it mostly concrete and other buildings? Within our country, we also focus on what can we do with our waste. So right now, my kindergarten students are really interested in what recycling really means. So we're talking about, when we have something, when we're finished with it, can we put it in the recycling, or put it in compost, or put it in the waste? Where does it go from there? On an international level, I have a student who's in senior kindergarten or year 2, and he wants to be the next prime minister. And his goal is he wants to get rid of all the plastic in the ocean. So that's what we're talking about now, is plastic in the ocean is a big problem. Plastics everywhere is a big problem. And climate change is another way that they could talk about it. So I try to be conscious of the community that I serve. And this is something that I think all of us community workers and educators can do the same. So think about the environment where they live. Think about the socioeconomic levels of our students and our communities. Think about the cultural background. So for example, are they coming from a community or a part of the world that has experienced war or experienced severe trauma? Maybe going outdoors is not something that that they can do right now because it's a trigger, or maybe it's something that is a refuge for them. To kind of like what Dr. Ajiman was speaking about this morning about what people who are refugees, for example, how they view outdoors. Community experience. So in the community where you're working, is it impacted by racism? Is it impacted by poverty? And ask yourself then, when the seasons are changing, so for example, in Canada, we have the 4 seasons. When we go to winter, that changes a lot of students' ability to access the outdoors. So were the outdoors a part of their integral life before? Did they come from a hotter place? Did they come from an agricultural community? Were plants or trees part of their surroundings? Or was it for a certain social class? And as I mentioned before, the changes in season can affect one's access. So are you able to do you have in your school, do you have a lending library for boots, or do you have a connection with an organization where they can get proper boots or proper clothing for the colder weather? Because what happens is many students and their families are not able to, so enjoying the outdoors in the winter is not something that can happen. The next thing that we should actually be conscious of is, what is accessible by walking or by public transit? So are there parks? Are there ravines? Are there conservation areas or trails that our families can access? And who feels comfortable there? Earlier on in November, I went to a talk by a person named Jacqueline Scott, and she mentioned something really interesting about the new paths that were created for the games that we had, Pan American games that we had. And she had mentioned that many young Black men do not feel comfortable riding their bikes on the paths because either it was almost like they weren't expected to be there. And so who feels comfortable there can really impact who gets a chance to access those parts of the community. If you look on the 2 screens below, these ones are about walkability. And I got them actually from the Walkable City, the neighborhood design and preferences and travel choices from the city of Toronto. And if you take a look, the red parts of the city are where it's impacted more by poverty. The fairer parts are like kind of like a light greenish, light yellowish. They are more wealthy. So if you look and you were to superimpose this map on the poverty by postal code map and on top of the TTC map, you'll be able to see that these areas where I'm circling here, northwest, east in Scarborough, and in the western part of the city in St. Paulton, the southwestern part of the city, it's not necessarily walkable. Transportation is not as easy to get to. They might have to wait a long time for the bus. And I know we've been watching with our pandemic how full some of the buses have been. And it's really interesting to know who has access to those kind of things and which part of the city you live in. The greener part, yeah,
sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, just your 1 minute
Okay.
warning.
Thank you. That's perfect. Okay, thank you. So the last thing I will leave you with then is what can be done during the pandemic. So as I said, what I'm doing with my students is I'm asking them what they can see through the window. In their fall, we did an observation activity with squirrels. So they had to look and note and use their tally skills and note what squirrels were doing. They were also interested in rainfall and snowfall. And then we moved on to the moon phases. We connected it to cultures for the lunar calendar, the Islamic calendar. And now we're thinking of planting. And this is the new issue that I'm thinking of right now, how to make it more equitable and accessible, because a lot of the planting essential materials that we deem necessary, like seeds and soil, at dollar stores right now, you can't buy them. And so many of my families would prefer to go to a dollar store because you can get a smaller amount and you don't need a car to bring them home. But if you go to a garden center, you can buy them. So that's a different way of looking at it. So now I need to think for myself, how am I going to make that activity as accessible as I can? So the last piece of advice then I would say is if you are a teacher and you're teaching online in the pandemic, think about taking your students with you. Outside with you. If you have a data plan that can enable that, take them for signs of the spring walk or in the snow. You can have them observe what types of snow, what you can do with snow, and try to make it as realistic as possible, even though they can't visit the place themselves. And the last thing I'd like to say is that knowledge is power. We all know that knowledge is power, but it's the opportunity that brings the experiences. And so for our students and our family, even though they might have the knowledge, if they don't have the opportunity, then they might not have those experiences and they're missing out. So thank you very much. Now, the last thing I would like to say, is I will put some links in the chat. And these are some links that if you live in the Toronto area or if you're in other parts of the country, you can access for examples and see where it can fit in your area. So I will put that in the chat just before we move on to at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison.
You're welcome. All right, so now we're going to move on to Rodway.
All right. Are we good to go?
Yeah, just give me 1 second. It's
Sure.
Shared window is closed. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it. I think we'll be good once you present it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Alison. That was great. And I'm going to try to, I think, perhaps expand a little bit or add on. I shouldn't say expand, but just maybe add, continue, or perhaps, in kind of the direction Alison went. But I'm going to start with a story. Do I have access to the camera? Can everybody see me right now? Is that possible?
I think everyone should see you. Yep.
Okay.
We see you.
Now, do you see a forest?
Yes.
All right. I can't see what I'm talking to you about. So hopefully you're able to see a forested area. A pathway is just kind of beyond that way. And I'm telling you a story that happened back in October. I came outside to this very area that I'm in right now to record a video because I'm an outdoor educator within the Toronto School Board. And I wanted to create a welcome video for the students that I'd be teaching virtually. So I came out here and as I was walking out, there's a bridge like just beyond there that crosses a little bit of a tributary or a creek. And the pathway I was going to take is previous to the bridge. On the bridge stood a woman, and I'll tell you, she was white, and that's pertinent to this story. That's the only reason why I bring that up, because that's not really common in kind of my my way of speaking. But anyhow, she was standing on the bridge, and I just said hello. We made eye contact. I said hello, and then I continued on the dirt pathway, and I ended up where I am. And I started setting up. You know, you say hi to people, then you don't really think about them anymore. It's just a polite thing to do. Well, moments later, I guess, after I had my tripod set up and I was kind of getting the phone set as well, she was walking along the pathway, the same one that I came along. And I just looked up, okay, no big deal. I continued on my way. And then I looked up again, and she was kind of looking at me from right about over here. And then I just kind of looked and waved a little bit, and she just looked, and then she continued along. And then when she got to right about here, she looked over her shoulder as she passed. And I thought, well, okay, this is weird. And then I had this kind of familiar feeling. A feeling that a lot of us Black men have when we're out in spaces that maybe we're not traditionally seen. And she made it out to the road, and when she got there, she so right about there, she met up with a gentleman who looked like he was walking home from work. I could tell that they didn't know each other, just kind of the way their body language was happening. And then she started pointing over in my direction as they spoke, and that kind of confirmed what I was thinking. Well, listen, I want to give her the benefit of the doubt still to this day. I can't tell you exactly because I don't know. I didn't have a conversation with her. But it felt like, what's that guy doing out there? You know, and I felt really uncomfortable about it. And it just brought up a lot of familiar ideas that I'd had, or sorry, a lot of familiar experiences I had had in my life growing up. Can we put up the first slide, please? Is that up? Hey, can I play? You know, it's this question that as children we all ask. You know, we want to be a part of the group, we want to join in. So we say, hey, can I play? And at that moment, you wait for the answer. And hopefully you hear the people who are playing the game say, yeah, come on in, join us. But they also hold the power to say no, because you've asked the question, right? You say, hey, can I play? And they can't say no to you. And I think we've all probably been on that end of receiving the no, and we know how that feels. Sometimes we don't even ask to play because we can see that we don't have maybe the right equipment to play, the right experiences. We don't know the game. So it's not as easy to want to join in. We just kind of sit back and watch. And other times we don't even, it doesn't even entertain us because we know that's not our game. That's not for us. We have other games that are for us. And I see that's kind of the experience that we have as we grow up in various circumstances, whether it be playing games or in school or in work, whatever you choose to do in life, you tend to kind of stick to what you know a lot of the time. And sometimes it's, and well, some of the time. Other times we are able to break out of that kind of bubble that we know, and we're able to experience things that we really are passionate about, and we get to join in, and suddenly we're included, and it feels great. Oh, hang on, I just lost my notes. Great. My mom grew up in Guyana, South America, so there's a connection there with Alison, and my dad as well. My mom grew up in basically in a rainforest. It looks like. I looked it up on Google Earth one day years ago, and it just was all green. I said, "Mom, this is where she grew up," and she said, "Yeah, there was basically just forest around," and that's what she knew. She also grew up climbing mango trees and eating the mangoes up in the trees, and she wasn't supposed to because she was a girl. Girls apparently weren't supposed to climb trees, right? Are you kidding me? Well, I love that my mom was a mango climbing rebel girl growing up. And she's inspired me in my love, my passion for the outdoors. That's where I get it from. And when I was young, she sent me outside multiple times in the winter. So think about it, a woman from Guyana, the hot country, coming up to Canada where she doesn't really understand this thing called snow, but she dresses me up in my used clothing or my secondhand clothing. I go outside, my mittens get soaked. I come back in, she gives me another pair and sends me back out. That was the procedure because she knew that I needed to be outside. That developed my passion for being out there. I work with a woman named Mel, and she's also Black. And the two of us often wonder, well, where are all the Black people in the outdoor field? Where are they? And it's a question that we've had for years. Now, I'll say this, that to me, it doesn't matter if there's more Black people. It matters that there are lots of people of a variety of races working in the outdoor fields, so that everybody can see themselves represented. And I'll say this, working in the department that I'm in the Toronto District School Board, I have never felt like an outsider. And it kind of gets me emotional when I say that, because I belong. This belongs. And unless you've lived your life wondering if you belong, unless you've lived your life knowing that you haven't belonged, you've been told as much many times, when you find a place where you belong, there's nothing like it. And so I thank the Toronto School Board and specifically the Outdoor Education Department, the Toronto Outdoor Education Schools Department, for being a place that's family to me. And so I'm very, very happy about that. I need to say that because this topic, it's real. There still isn't a lot of diversity in our department, but it's changing. It's changing. There needs to be more though. So how does that happen? Well, it starts from the children. The slide that's up, it's a photo of my 3 children. One of them, you would definitely be able to go, hey, that's your kid. The other 2, you'd have to look at their facial features to recognize it. We're a blended family or mixed family, biracial, whatever you want to say. I struggle with what's the right term is, but they're my children is what I know. And I want them to always feel like they can play, they can join in. And I want them to get a passion for the outdoors now, because as they grow up, if they know the outdoors, if that's what life is to them, then they're going to they might choose career paths that have to do with the environmental sciences or environmental literature or art, visual art, or they might want to be a park ranger. When I go to the parks, which I do often, the Ontario parks, I'm trying hard, but I can't think of a time when I saw a park warden or someone working the gates that looked anything like me. So what if that were to change because of how we raise our children, right? And then the exposure that they get. And so I think this is super important. Can we go to the second slide, please? So
as we go to that, Rodway, just wanted to give you your minute time check.
Awesome. So reconnecting with the land, to do that, you have to be on the land. It's important for us to figure out how we can get people outside. And that will inspire a love for the outdoors in children, but it will also reconnect or re-inspire you as an adult. Whether you're a teacher or parent, it will re-inspire you. We have to notice and wonder. We have to notice who's out there. My challenge to you is when you go outside today on your walk in your local ravine or your green space, notice who's out there walking as well. And, in Toronto, I know that it's changing. We're seeing a lot more diversity when we go outside, and that's great. When I go further north, still not quite there yet, but it is slowly changing. So we have to notice that, and then we have to wonder why. And I think it's a question we have to continue to ask ourselves. And then we have to gear up and get outside. We have to change our cultural mindset, so full cultural mindset about weather. And it's raining, so it's bad, or it's gray, so it's gloomy. Well, no. If we spend time outside, we start to realize the beauty in all of the weather. Sure, weather can be difficult to deal with at times, but it's just weather. It doesn't mean any harm. And so we have to adapt and teach that mindset. And then I think we're going to start to see a change as people grow up, as children grow up into adults. And then as we teach them well, who knows, we might be looking at departments where we see beautiful blended mixes of an ecosystem of people accepting and needing one another and cheering each other on. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I hope some of what I said made sense. I felt like I just rambled for 10 minutes. However, it's beautiful to be outside. I hope you get outside today, and miigwech.
Thanks so much, Rodway. That made a ton of sense, so no rambling. So I think we have Matthew up next.
Just going to wait for the first slide, but I can begin by discussing and saying thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to the 3 of us, and thank you for being open to looking from environmental education from the Black experience. I'm going to start off by briefly talking about my lens on this, topic, which is related to environmental racism. And environmental racism in Canada, what is it? What are its impacts? And what can we do, racialized and non-racialized individuals, about it? And what is the Black experience in Canada related to this? Racism isn't usually this obvious. Environmental racism in its context to the Black experience is a sort of covert racism, sort of as Rodway mentioned earlier. This is on slide 2, by the way, Alison. And as Alison inferred, there is a societal bias related to how people who identify as African Canadian or Black are seen in the outdoor spaces. And overtly, we just think, because we're in Canada and our perspective of what the Greater Toronto area is like in our outdoor spaces in the park, we assume that everyone has access and has rights and feels a sense of belonging. And that in itself is a form of covert racism, that nuance, that unsaid bias. But we need to recognize that covert racism in terms of environmental education and outdoor education is racially biased decisions that are based upon the hidden, and how we as a larger non-racialized community rationalize how we see people of racial diversity, including the Black community, in outdoor spaces. The next one, please, Alison. Thank you. So what is environmental racism? And the whole concept of environmental racism, believe it or not, it's not new. We've actually come to a point in time in society where we've actually defined what it is. And to the left is a wonderful book that I've read, which we'll eventually share with you as a resource, that is sort of an introduction to what is environmental racism in the context of the year 2000 plus, from both the Canadian and the American perspectives. The next one, please, Alison. Because environmental racism is actually a concept that is rooted in the history of the environmental justice movement, stemming from social and political action within the United States. What a lot of people fail to realize is that, back in the 60s and 70s, the next one, please, Alison, to really understand environmental racism and understand that environmental racism has come from environmental justice, a lot of people don't understand and recognize that, similar to LGBTQ awareness in terms of pride started off in Stonewall in New York, this activism, this level, has come from and rooted from the Black community. People don't realize that historically some significant events and people tied to the civil rights movement in the US and some in Canada brought environmental racism into the public forum for millions in North America, thus making environmental racism a very, very critical social cause in its own rights. And that stemmed from examples of Martin Luther King going to Memphis in support of environmental and economic rights of striking garbage workers. And this is part of the awareness that we need to bring to students in our Ontario school system, that connection to environmental education and experience and learning is actually an inclusive sense of education, a historical legacy that we don't often teach. We don't teach it through literacy. We don't teach it through science. We don't teach it through the guidance curriculum. Who am I? How am I contributing to the experience in which I live? And to understand environmentalism, we got to look back to the history and analyze the environmental movements in Canada and the United States, and how that's impacted and shifted social policy and change. For example, the resource I have there, the book by Robert Bullard about dumping in Dixie, about race, class, and environmental equality. And a lot of students that are racialized, Indigenous, and of other color spectrums don't have that rich history and nuance and understanding, similar to what Rodway say. You do belong, and you actually have a history in this, and you actually have been part of why we have parks designed the way we do, why there are certain social spaces designed. The next one, please, Alison. Throughout Canadian history, many marginalized and BIPOC populations have been displaced, relocated, and discriminated against. by a lack of environmental regulation and policy. In many instances, corporations and manufacturing sectors whose products at the time, throughout the development of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, due to mass consumerism, implementation and strategies of mass marketing of products, comfortable lifestyle, don't realize that in order to have those wonderful products, mainly plastic-based and petroleum-based, these plants and facilities had to be built somewhere. They're not being built in Rosedale or in Baby Point or in the Guild. Our own policies and our own efforts in trying to do progressive consumerism, expand a business enterprise, develop the Canadian economy, had displaced many disadvantaged and racialized individuals, predominantly in the Indigenous and the Black communities throughout Canada. And in Canada, the Indigenous and African American communities, especially in Nova Scotia, have been the most impacted by environmental racism. Next one, Alison, thank you. For example, Africville. Many of you have heard the term, especially when it comes to Black History Month of the settlement, its foundings, its connections of the Maroons from Jamaica and other Caribbeans of Afro descent that have came to this part of Canada to settle as a safe haven. And for those Blacks that escaped tremendous hardship in the States, settled in this area. That's a wonderful story everyone knows. What a wonderful example of a community, of an environment established for a marginalized group in North America during a very tenuous political time. Well, the history that we don't teach, and we need to bring awareness about social justice awareness and voice, is that in Nova Scotia, this community, the descendants of many enslaved people, was used as a regional dumping ground for decades. And then it was bulldozed in the 60s. And that is where the greater metropolitan area of Halifax provided the land for Blacks to settle. Isn't that kind of morally corrupt? But we did it, and we accept it, and we look at it as a lens of a wonderful settlement. But why was a racialized group offered this land to settle? Why not another part of Halifax? We need to teach our students to critically engage, reflect about the environmental histories and atrocities that have occurred in Canada. Also, another good example that ties to our relationship with the Indigenous community is also about this book, There's Something in the Water, by Ingrid Waldron. Many of you have heard of the book or the film, which the book was based upon, the documentary. That was, Waldron's book was published in 2018, and the film was screened at the Toronto Film Festival of 2019. And the whole idea was she was bringing to the attention about the Black lived experiences and those of the Indigenous communities related to the approach that they did to combat environmental racism. Wonderful, wonderful teaching tool in terms of advocacy, the use of space by racialized and marginalized groups, how you find voice, collectivism, a wonderful tool that can touch upon so many areas in our Ontario curriculum to empower and engage Black, Indigenous, and other racialized students who don't see themselves as advocates belonging in the environmental education or social justice or environmental justice communities, that they do have a presence. They too are seen. They too have done social action to a point that it's now affected change. And as a result of this work in Nova Scotia, an excellent example of both the Indigenous and the Black community. And due to Waldron's efforts, and thanks to Elliot Page for developing Waldron's book and chronicalizing the experiences, the Black experiences, as well as the Indigenous, of environmental racism and its issues and impact. There's now going to be an introduction of a new bill called Bill C-230, a federal private members bill, spurred on by the influence and the impact of racialized and Black and Indigenous peoples who normally were not seen as environmental advocates to change and shift, and calls for a development strategy to actually address environmental racism in many pockets on a federal level throughout Canada. Next one,
Matthew,
Alison.
just jumping in for a minute time check.
Thank you. The next one, Alison. Again, another wonderful connection to geography, political science, especially at the secondary level. We'll share these slides with you at some point in time, but what a wonderful way to look at mathematics through this lens and see the data of the marginalized communities in Nova Scotia and Indigenous communities impacted by toxic industries. The next one, Alison. Oh, another wonderful brief example is Chemical Valley in Sarnia, Ontario, and how that's impacted the very large Indigenous community and the small Black community in Sarnia. The next one. We won't go into detail with all these examples. We'll go to the next one too, Alison. On a more local context is the example of McClure Crescent in Scarborough in Toronto. And again, how a racialized community trying to buy their first homes, subsidized and promoted by the provincial government through the Ontario Housing Corporation and the Federal Housing Corporation, knowingly sold and supported the selling of homes on land that they were very much aware of was a toxic waste site. So again, I want to bring into context, next one, Alison, that environmental racism today, the last one, Alison, has many grassroots, even tied to today in terms of BIPOC, the social justice mobilization of racialized individuals, those people of color, Black individuals and Indigenous peoples. It's nothing new. And the social efforts we are seeing through the political action of BIPOC today actually has its foundations and roots of organizing, voice, mobilizing, effective change on policy, government, in our own education system, stems from social justice and from the Black community, as well as Indigenous community. And my last final words are to the educators that are out here. COVID has taught us to now really empower our current situation in how we repurpose outdoor spaces, not for those that are privileged and non-white, but how can we repurpose, re-engage, and reconnect with our communities and really tie that into creating a level of openness and engagement and inclusion for those racialized students, like in my community in Parkdale, that is dense and live in apartment spaces. And how do we repurpose school properties that we're doing now to enhance education, to tie literacy with outdoors, science with outdoors, dance, drama, and phys ed to outdoors. Those are the connections, how we develop and encourage kids to embrace and have a new perspective of interacting with environmental education, environmental social justice, and be a part of the communities that they live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And just once again, thank you to all of you, to yourself, Rodway and Alison, for sharing these perspectives today. They're so important. It's such an important conversation to have and continue to have. All your perspectives and your leadership in the area of outdoor education and the Black experience, as well as environmental racism. So thank you. And we do have about 6 minutes for questions if anyone would like to put those into the chat right now. So far, we've had just a ton of feedback. Just everyone's really resonating with what's being said here, and there's lots of appreciation for your experiences today.
Thank you. Clara, I'm just going to put the link in the chat, and I put it so that anybody with the link can view. There are some resources that we have. So it's a Google document. So even if you don't, you're not part of the TDSB or whatever, you should be able to click on it. And there's some community resources as well as others, and it'll be in the form of a slide.
That's great. Thank you. So if everyone wants to click on that link now to get those resources, they won't be available after the presentation. So open that up right now. Someone says, thank you to my amazing principal, Matthew Webb. This was hugely informative. Thank you, Alison and Rodway. Lots to take away and think about. Many more thank yous coming in the chat.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so we do have some time if anyone would like to ask any questions. Just kind of taking note of the chat here.
Clara, may I share with those individuals that are here that if you're not aware of it, EcoSchools through the TDSB in partnership with the University of Toronto is offering environmental education part 1 and part 2. And if they want some further information, I'm happy to facilitate that, or they can contact EcoSchools directly, or they can also contact the Ecom 2021 facilitators, because there is opportunity for those of you that like to engage in this work deeper and make those connections to your students, to your communities, forms of parent engagement. The course offering is a wonderful way to get yourself immersed into the understandings and foundations of environmental education and how it ties to the curriculum.
That's awesome. Thanks, Matthew. There's just a ton of awesome feedback about the presentation. Someone wishing that we could have seen this presentation when we took EE Part 1 together for Matthew. Was that a question here? Okay, so one question coming in from Michelle. I'm working on a community climate action guide for youth for the TDSB. Any insights from any of you, or would you like to review a draft?
I didn't hear the last part. Would I like to review the draft?
The first part of the question is, I'm working on a community climate action guide for youth for the TDSB. Any insights from you, I guess, on this guide, or asking if you might want to review a draft of this guide?
Well, I would love to see the draft. Yeah, I would like to, if it's possible.
Great. So Michelle, if you want to contact, I guess, the ecom conferences at ecoschools.ca email, we can connect you with Alison if that's all right with you, Alison.
Yes, I can even put my email in the
Okay,
chat.
great. Thank you.
Because I work if I think it was Michelle. I worked for TDSB as well.
Okay,
so she can just find me. I think I had one question here from Janelle. Let me just.
Oh yeah, we've got a couple actually. Yeah.
Oh, it's down here. Oh, here it is. It says, do you make it a priority to showcase other people of color in your environmental teaching? Yes, Janelle, I do. I'm still in my learning process with Indigenous connections to the land, so I'm not an expert. So whenever there is something that I feel I don't know and I don't want to, culturally appropriate, then I make sure that I seek out the information that I need. And yes, so for example, I try to also showcase the cultures of the community that I have. So in my case, for example, I have a lot of children from the Bangladeshi community as well as, different communities. So I try to incorporate all that as well. I think it's important for children to see the different cultures that are part of it and that are also interested in the environment. So.
Amazing. Thanks, Alison. And we have gotten a kind of a bunch of questions towards the end, but we are 1 minute away from wrapping up. So thanks for providing your email addresses. If folks want to reach out directly, thank you so much for generously providing that, Matthew and Alison. Yeah, so I think we may have to wrap up since we're nearly at 11:20. But thank you once again to everyone who attended today. It was so great to chat with all of you, and I hope everyone gets to check out a few more ecom sessions before the conference wraps up today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'll close the room now.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.